You think you know how a story's going to go. A lone rider, a damsel in distress, a dusty trail leading to nowhere. You've heard it 1,000 times. But let me tell you, what James found at the end of that forgotten track, it wasn't just a woman in trouble. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would unravel everything he thought he knew about good, evil, and the secrets people bury. The road didn't so much end as it just gave up, dissolving into dust and silence. It wasn't a place you found by accident. You had to already be lost. James rode slow, letting his mare, Bess, pick her way through the dying mesquite. The sun was a pale coin behind a curtain of yellow grit, and the wind had been moaning since dawn. He hadn't spoken a word in 3 days. There hadn't been a reason to. Until he heard the cry. It was faint, just a little hitching sound, like the wind caught in a broken bottle. But it was human. James pulled Bess to a halt, his hand resting on the stock of the rifle at his back. He listened, every muscle tensed. There it was again. A whimper. Not one, but two, tangled together like threads of sorrow. He dismounted, tying Bess to a skeletal tree, and moved forward on foot, his boots making no sound on the parched earth. The air smelled of rust and neglect. And then he saw her. She was tied to a splintered fence post, her arms wrenched behind her back. Her dress was torn, and a line of dried blood traced a path from her temple to her jaw. Dark hair, matted and wild, hid half her face. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were wide open, but vacant, staring into a distance only she could see. She was a ghost already, just waiting for her body to catch up. And at her feet, wrapped in a filthy horse blanket, were the whimpers. 2 infants, their faces pink and pinched from the cold, fussing weakly. Twin girls, no more than a day or 2 old. One of them was sucking on the corner of the rough cloth, a tiny, desperate motion. The other just blinked, as if the world had already proven to be too much. James didn't speak. He crouched, pulling his hunting knife from his sheath. The woman's lips moved, a dry, cracked sound escaping. "Don't," she rasped. "Don't take them." Her voice was like gravel scraping stone. He ignored her, moving slow, deliberate. The blade sliced through the thick rope binding her wrists. Her hands fell to her sides like stones. She swayed, a rag doll with its strings cut, and then collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. She was nothing, lighter than a sack of flour, just bones and silence, and a story he didn't want to know. He looked down the hill, an old homestead, its roof half caved in, a wisp of smoke still curling from the chimney. Someone had been here, recently. The ropes were too new, the tracks too fresh. These people hadn't gone far. He gathered the twins first, wrapping them gently in his own saddle blanket and slinging it across his chest like a shield. Then he lifted the woman. "You're coming with me," he said. His voice was steady, a promise in a world of broken things. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The walk back to his cabin was a slow, careful procession. He led the mare, trying not to jostle the precious cargo on his chest. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing shallow. Snow began to fall, lazy, fat flakes that clung to his eyelashes and melted on his collar. By the time he saw the familiar shape of his small cabin through the trees, the world had gone white. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The warmth of the stove was a soft, welcome whisper. He laid her on his cot, his movements efficient and quiet. He checked her for injuries. Bruises bloomed like dark flowers on her skin. Her ankles were raw and bleeding where the ropes had dug in. One eye was swollen shut. He covered her with his thickest quilt, his gaze carefully averted from the torn bodice of her dress. He turned his attention to the twins. They were crying in earnest now, tiny fists flailing. Hunger. He built up the fire, set a small pot of water to boil, and pulled out his last tin of goat's milk. He mixed it with rainwater, warmed it, and carefully fed each baby with a strip of clean cloth dipped in the mixture. They drank greedily, their little mouths working with a fierce will to live. Only when they were asleep, nestled in a makeshift cradle by the fire, did James allow himself to sit. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his chair, rifle across his lap, and watched the woman's chest rise and fall. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But as he looked at her bruised face, He saw something in her expression he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just surrender, it was defiance. A tiny spark in the ashes. But there was something else he'd seen. Something that made the hairs on his arms stand up. When he'd cut the ropes from her wrists, the coarse fibers had rubbed away the dirt and grime. And underneath, branded into her skin, was a symbol, a stylized black bird. A raven or maybe a crow. It wasn't a random mark, it was a claim, a mark of ownership. Whoever did this to her wasn't just cruel. They were sending a message, and James had a sinking feeling he had just stepped right into the middle of it. For 2 days she didn't speak a word. She lay on the cot, her eyes following him as he moved around the small cabin, a silent, watchful ghost. She ate the broth he made her, let him clean her wounds but offered nothing in return. The silence was a living thing between them, thick and heavy. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft cooing of the twins. James worked, his hands never idle. He chopped wood, mended a loose floorboard, cleaned his rifle with meticulous care. He was a man comfortable with quiet. He'd lived with it his whole life. But this was different. This silence was charged, humming with unspoken horrors. He kept glancing at the brand on her wrist. The image of that black bird was burned into his mind. It felt like a bad omen, a shadow falling over his quiet life. He noticed things. The babies, though he'd thought them twins, weren't identical. One had a tiny crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. The other didn't. They were close in age, but maybe not sisters after all. The thought sent a chill down his spine. What kind of monster would abandon two infants like this? The second night, he was woken by a sound, a whisper. He sat up, his hand instantly going to the knife he kept by his cot. The woman was tossing in her sleep, her face contorted in a nightmare. A single word escaped her lips, so faint he almost missed it. Corvus. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. Corvus. He knew the name. It was the Latin word for crow, for raven. The bird branded on her wrist. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a name, a clan, a warning. The next morning he went about his chores, the word echoing in his head. He fed the babies, changed their makeshift diapers, and stoked the fire. The woman was awake, watching him with those same haunted eyes. He decided to try again. "You're safe here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She didn't respond, just stared. He sighed, turning back to the fire. He had to go to town for supplies. The goat's milk was gone, and he needed more cloth for the babies. Leaving them was a risk, but staying and starving was a bigger one. He wrapped the sleeping infants warmly, placing them in the cradle close to her cot. "I'll be back before sundown," he told her. "Don't open the door for anyone." She blinked once. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement he'd gotten. The ride to town was tense. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered name. Corvus. He felt like he was being watched. He shook his head, trying to clear the paranoia. He was just spooked, that's all. He was wrong. He was just leaving the general store, his saddlebags full, when he saw him. A man leaning against the saloon, pretending to be idle. A big man dressed like a trapper, with a thick beard and cold, calculating eyes. James would have paid him no mind, except for one small detail. As the man pushed himself off the wall to light a pipe, his sleeve rode up. And there, on the inside of his wrist, was a tattoo, a stylized black bird, a crow. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition in the trapper's eyes, just a flat, predatory assessment. But James knew. This wasn't a coincidence. The man wasn't a trapper. He was a scout, a hunter, and he was looking for something, or someone. James mounted Bess and rode out of town, not slow and steady like before, but with a new urgency. He didn't look back, but he could feel the trapper's eyes on him, a physical weight on his shoulders. The quiet sanctuary of his cabin had been breached. The world was closing in. He arrived back at the cabin just as the sun was bleeding across the horizon. He burst through the door, his heart pounding. The woman was sitting up, one of the babies in her arms, humming a tune so soft it was barely there. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something other than fear in her eyes. It was a question. That night she finally spoke. They'll find us, she whispered, her voice a fragile thing. Who are they? James asked, his voice low and serious. She looked down at the sleeping child in her arms. My husband's family, she said. The Crows. Corvus. They think I'm worthless, she continued, her voice trembling. A burden. They said I should have died giving birth, especially to girls. Her hand tightened on the baby's blanket. James listened, his face a mask of stone. It was a brutal story, but it was incomplete. There was more. He could feel it. The brand, he said, his voice gentle but firm. What does it mean? She flinched, pulling her sleeve down over her wrist as if his words had burned her. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. You don't understand, she sobbed. He wasn't just my husband. He was a king in these parts, a cruel king, and that brand. She choked on the words. It means I'm his property, forever. The confession hung in the air, heavier than any silence had been. Her husband wasn't just some abusive farmer. He was the leader of a powerful, dangerous clan, the Crows, and they didn't just abandon their property, they hunted it down. But even that horrifying truth wasn't the whole story. Nora was still holding something back, a secret so dark she was more afraid of it than she was of the men who had left her for dead. The next few days were a blur of tense waiting. Every snap of a twig, every call of a bird sent a jolt of adrenaline through James. He taught Nora how to load and fire his spare pistol, her hands trembling but her eyes determined. They worked in a strange, silent partnership. Two strangers bound by a shared threat. He was no longer just a rescuer, he was a guardian. And she was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, fighting for her children. He needed more information. He had to know what he was up against. Against his better judgment, he decided to ride to a larger town, a day's journey away, a place where news might travel. He left Nora with the rifle, the pistol, and a stern warning. Shoot first. Don't even ask who it is. The town of Redemption was bigger, louder, and dirtier than the last one. As he tied Bess to a hitching post, he noticed a crowd gathered around the sheriff's office. He pushed his way through, and his blood ran cold. Nailed to the wall was a wanted poster. His own face, sketched in charcoal, stared back at him. Wanted James Ghost Callahan for the kidnapping of the widow, Nora Crow, and her infant children. Reward $500, Callahan, a name he hadn't used in 10 years, a name he thought he'd buried. The Crows weren't just hunting him, they were using the law to do it. They had twisted the story, painting him as the villain, the kidnapper. He was a fugitive. Every hand in this town would be turned against him. They hadn't just poisoned the well, they'd poisoned his very name. He pulled his hat down low, backing away from the crowd. He had to get back. He had to warn Nora. He was halfway to his horse when a voice cut through the noise. Well now, if it isn't the ghost himself. James froze. He turned slowly. Leaning against a post was a man with a silver star pinned to his chest. Sheriff Brody, a man James knew from his past life, a man who never forgot a face. It's been a long time, Callahan, Brody said, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. I heard you were dead. You heard wrong, James said, his voice flat. I see that, the sheriff said, his eyes flicking to the wanted poster. Kidnapping, huh? Never took you for that. It's not what it looks like, James said, his mind racing. It never is, Brody sighed. But the Crow family has a lot of influence. Their word carries weight. You're coming with me, James. We can sort this out in a cell. James knew he couldn't let that happen. A cell was a death sentence. The Crows would make sure of it. I can't do that, Brody. Don't make me do this, son, the sheriff warned. In a flash, James moved. He shoved a bystander into the sheriff, spun around, and vaulted onto Bess's back. He dug his heels in, and the mare shot forward, scattering the crowd. A gunshot rang out behind him, but it went wide. He galloped out of town, the shouts and chaos fading behind him. He was no longer just protecting Nora. He was running for his own life. He rode hard, pushing Bess to her limit. He had to get back to the cabin. He had to get Nora and the children and disappear. They had to run, not just from the Crows, but from the law itself. As he neared his land, a plume of smoke caught his eye. It was coming from the direction of his cabin. But it wasn't the thin gray wisp from his chimney. It was thick and black. Panic seized him. He urged Bess faster, crashing through the underbrush. He burst into the clearing and reined in hard. The cabin was fine. The smoke was coming from a small campfire a few yards away, and standing by the fire holding a bucket was a woman, an older woman with sharp eyes and a bonnet tied firmly under her chin. She was staring at his cabin with a look of intense curiosity. It was Evelyn Parrish, a local widow known for her sharp tongue and even sharper nose for gossip. "James!" she called out, a saccharine smile spreading across her face. "I was just passing by. Thought I'd bring you some of my gooseberry jam. Heard you might have company." Her eyes darted towards the cabin door, a hungry look in them. James dismounted, his body tense. This was no friendly visit. Evelyn Parrish never did anything without a reason. "That's kind of you, Evelyn," he said, his voice tight. "But we're fine." "Oh, I'm sure you are," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. She took a step closer. "People are talking, James, saying you've taken in that unfortunate Crow girl, the one whose husband met such a tragic end." She tutted sympathetically. "And with 2 babies. Such a burden." Before James could respond, the cabin door creaked open. Nora stood there, the rifle in her hands, her face pale but resolute. Evelyn's eyes lit up. "Ah, there she is, the poor dear. You look exhausted, child. I brought you some special herbal tea to help you sleep." She held out a small, cloth-wrapped package. Nora looked from the package to Evelyn's smiling face, and then to James. A silent communication passed between them. James had seen that smile before, on the face of a wolf cornering a lamb. "No, thank you," Nora said, her voice surprisingly strong. "We have everything we need." Evelyn's smile faltered for a second. She glanced around the clearing, her eyes seeming to count every tree, every rock. "A shame," she said, her voice turning cool. "The Crows are very worried about you, dear. Matthew especially. He's a good man. He just wants what's best for you and his brother's children." The lie was so blatant, so cold, it sucked the air out of the clearing. This wasn't gossip. This was a message and a threat. Evelyn Parrish wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a spy. She was working for them. "You should leave, Evelyn," James said, his voice dangerously low. She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, I'll leave. But they know you're here now. They know everything." She turned and walked away, her back straight and proud. James and Nora watched her go. The temporary peace of their sanctuary was shattered. The enemy wasn't just coming, they were already here, and they wore the face of a kindly neighbor. As Evelyn disappeared into the trees, Nora turned to James, a new terrifying understanding dawning in her eyes. "The tea," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the small package Evelyn had left on a stump. "It wasn't for sleep, was it?" James walked over and picked it up. He unwrapped the cloth. Inside wasn't just tea leaves. Mixed in were the dark bell-shaped flowers of nightshade, deadly poison. Evelyn hadn't come to spy. She'd come to finish the job. They tied Evelyn Parrish to the same chair she'd likely spied on them from. The kindly widow facade had melted away, replaced by a sneer of pure malice. She wasn't talking. She just glared at them, her eyes full of venom. "She's one of them," Nora said, pacing the small room. "She's been reporting everything." "More than that," James said, staring at the poison flowers now smoldering in the fireplace. "She was their assassin." He turned to Evelyn. "What do they want? It's not just about Nora. Why go to all this trouble?" Evelyn just laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Ghost. You think this is about a runaway wife? This is about a legacy, an empire." James knelt in front of her, his face inches from hers. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a buried avalanche. "I can be very persuasive, Evelyn. You're going to tell me everything, or you'll learn why they call me the Ghost." Something in his eyes made her flinch. The venom in her own gaze was replaced by a flicker of fear. She swallowed hard. "The children," she finally spat out. "It's about the children." Nora stopped pacing. "What about them?" "Not both of them," Evelyn sneered. "Just the one. The one with the mark." James and Nora exchanged a look of confusion. the small crescent-shaped birthmark on the one baby's shoulder. What could that possibly mean? Her husband, Caleb Crow, was a paranoid fool, Evelyn explained, her words spilling out now in a torrent. He didn't trust his own family. He thought they were all after his share of the family fortune. And he was right, she smirked. Before he died, he found a way to secure it for himself. He had a map tattooed onto his daughter, a map hidden in the design of her birthmark. A map, tattooed onto the skin of a newborn baby. The monstrousness of it was breathtaking. A map to what? James demanded. To everything, Evelyn whispered, her eyes wide with a greedy light. Gold, land deeds, banknotes, a fortune big enough to buy the whole territory. The Crows need that baby. Without her, they're ruined. Old Man Crow, the patriarch, he'll burn the world down to get his hands on that map. The pieces clicked into place. The hunt, the wanted posters, the poison. It wasn't about punishing Nora. It was a treasure hunt, and the baby was the prize. Suddenly, a sound from outside shattered the tense silence. A single, sharp crack. A rifle shot. A bullet ripped through the cabin wall, splintering the wood just above Nora's head. They were here. Get down, James yelled, shoving Nora and the babies towards the floor. He kicked the chair out from under Evelyn, sending her sprawling. Another shot tore through the window, showering the room with glass. The siege had begun. James scrambled to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. He could see them, moving through the trees like wraiths. At least half a dozen men, maybe more. They were surrounding the cabin, taking up positions. This wasn't a reckless charge. It was a calculated military-style assault. They're trying to pin us down, he hissed, crawling back to Nora. He handed her the pistol. Stay away from the walls. If they get close to the door, you shoot. Nora nodded, her face grim. The terror was still there, but it was overlaid with a cold, hard anger. She huddled behind the overturned table, shielding the crying infants with her body. Gunfire erupted from all sides, a deafening chorus of violence. Bullets thudded into the log walls, sending splinters flying. James returned fire sparingly, aiming carefully, making every shot count. He was a good shot, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. It was a matter of time. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the clearing. The shooting subsided into an eerie silence. What are they doing? Nora whispered. Waiting, James replied. Waiting for us to make a mistake. Then a voice called out from the darkness, a voice Nora knew all too well. Nora, it's Matthew, your brother-in-law. Nora froze. Come on out, Nora, Matthew yelled. This has gone on long enough. We just want you and the girls back safe. Don't listen to him, James warned. The man you're with. Matthew's voice was laced with mock concern. Do you know who he is? That's James Callahan, the ghost of the Red Canyon. He's a wanted murderer, Nora. He killed my cousin in that stagecoach robbery 10 years ago. Nora's head whipped around, her eyes wide with shock and confusion as she stared at James. The name on the wanted poster, Callahan. She'd been so focused on the kidnapping charge she hadn't even processed it. He's not protecting you, Nora. Matthew's voice dripped with poison. He knows about the map. He's just using you to get to the treasure himself. He's no better than us. Come on out, and we'll let you live. The words hung in the air, a seed of doubt planted in the blood-soaked soil of their fight for survival. Nora looked at James, the pistol in her hand wavering. The man who had saved her, cared for her, protected her. Was he her savior, or was he just another captor, with a kinder face and a gentler touch? The quiet hero was suddenly a wanted murderer, and the lines between good and evil blurred into a terrifying, indistinguishable gray. The silence inside the cabin was suddenly more deafening than the gunfire had been. Nora stared at James, her eyes searching his face for a truth he'd kept buried for a decade. The pistol felt heavy in her hand. Is it true, as she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart? Are you Callahan? James didn't look away. He didn't deny it. He just gave a slow, weary nod. It's true. The confession landed like a physical blow. Her rescuer, her protector, a murderer. The world tilted on its axis. You killed his cousin? No, James said, his voice raw. I didn't kill anyone. The crows framed me. He saw the disbelief warring with hope in her eyes and knew he had to tell her everything. 10 years ago, I was young and stupid. I ran with a rough crowd. We heard about a stagecoach carrying a big payroll. We were going to rob it. But someone tipped off the crows. Matthew and his cousin were part of a rival outfit. They hit the coach before we did. They killed the guards, took the money, and shot their own cousin in the process to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He took a breath, the memory still tasting like ash in his mouth. They needed a scapegoat. My crew scattered, but I was the one they pinned it on. They paid off a witness. The law believed them. I've been living as a ghost ever since, hiding in these mountains, trying to outrun a past that wasn't even mine. He looked at her, his gaze intense. Finding you, it wasn't a coincidence, Nora. When I saw that brand on your wrist, I knew. I knew the crows were involved. This was my chance. Not for revenge, for redemption, to finally do something right and stop the family that ruined my life. Nora's mind reeled. It was an incredible story, but the conviction in his voice, the pain in his eyes. She believed him. She had to. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Suddenly, a loud crash from the back of the cabin jolted them back to the present. They were using a log as a battering ram on the back door. They were running out of time. They're coming in, James said, his face grim. He looked around the small room, his eyes searching for an escape that didn't exist. The cabin was a death trap. The cellar, Nora said suddenly. James looked at her. There's no cellar. Yes, there is, she insisted. Caleb, my husband, he told me once, when he was drunk. He bragged about it. His father was paranoid. He built secret passages into all his properties. He said there was a back door under the hearth, in case of trouble. They scrambled to the fireplace. The stones were heavy, set deep in the earth. Working together, they pried at the largest one. It moved. With a groan of protest, the massive flagstone lifted, revealing a dark, gaping hole beneath. A ladder made of rough-hewn logs descended into the darkness. An old mining tunnel, an escape route. The back door splintered, then crashed inward. Shouts echoed from the other room. Go! James urged, helping Nora down the ladder with one of the babies. He handed her the second one, then grabbed their dwindling supplies and the pistol. He started to follow her down just as the first of the Crow gang burst into the room. A shot rang out, chipping the stone near his head. He dropped into the tunnel, pulling the heavy stone slab back into place above them. They were plunged into absolute darkness and a sudden shocking silence. They could hear the muffled shouts of the men above, frustrated and angry. They were safe for now. James struck a match. The tiny flame illuminated a narrow, damp tunnel shored up with rotting timbers. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth and decay. We need to keep moving, he said. They lit a small lantern and moved deeper into the earth. The tunnel twisted and turned. After what felt like an eternity, Nora stopped. We need to rest, she said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. She needed to feed the babies. They found a small alcove and huddled together for warmth. As Nora tended to the infants, James kept watch, his rifle ready. The silence of the tunnel was unnerving. In the flickering lantern light, Nora looked down at the child with the crescent mark. The map, she whispered, tracing the delicate lines on the baby's shoulder. It just looked like a birthmark. How could it be a map? James leaned closer, holding the lantern high. Let me see. He studied the mark, his brow furrowed in concentration. The lines were too perfect, too deliberate for a natural mark. There were swirls and dots, strange geometric shapes hidden within the crescent. It was writing of a sort, but it made no sense. It wasn't a map of any terrain he knew. This isn't a map, he said slowly, a strange realization dawning on him. It's a key. He'd seen something similar once, in a bank in a big city, a safe deposit box key. Not a physical key, but a code, a series of symbols that, when presented to the right person, would grant access. The treasure isn't buried in the dirt, James murmured. It's locked away in a bank vault somewhere. Nora looked at him, her eyes wide. But where? Which bank? A sudden thought struck her. It was so wild, so improbable, she almost dismissed it. She gently unwrapped the other baby, the one without the mark. Or so she had thought. She turned the baby over, examining her skin in the dim light. And then she saw it. It was almost invisible, a faint, silvery tracing on the baby's back, like a scar that had healed over. It could only be seen when the light hit it at just the right angle. It wasn't a key, it was a word. The name of a bank in St. Louis. Caleb hadn't tattooed a map on one daughter. He'd split the secret between two. One baby had the key, the other had the location. To get the fortune, you needed both of them. It was a diabolical, brilliant plan. But it raised a new, terrifying question. She had been told they were twins. But looking at them now, one with the dark, tattooed mark, the other with the faint, silvery one, they looked nothing alike. The ground shifted beneath Nora once more. Her entire world was built on a foundation of lies. Who were these children she was protecting? And what other secrets had her husband taken to his grave? The revelation in the tunnel changed everything. The children weren't just treasure maps. They were living, breathing secrets, each holding a piece of a puzzle Nora was only beginning to understand. They followed the winding passage for what felt like miles, the air growing colder and damper with every step. Finally they saw it, a faint crack of gray light ahead. The tunnel exit. They emerged into a narrow canyon, the morning sun just beginning to touch the tops of the rock walls. They were free of the cabin, but they were far from safe. They were on foot in hostile territory with two infants and a family of killers on their trail. As they paused to get their bearings, a figure stepped out from behind a rock outcropping, a rifle leveled at James's chest. It was the trapper, the one James had seen in town, the Crow Scout with the raven tattoo. "Going somewhere, Ghost?" the trapper sneered. His eyes, however, weren't on James. They were fixed on the babies in Nora's arms, a hungry, greedy light in them. "I figured you'd use the tunnel," he said, stepping closer. "Old Man Crow isn't the only one who knows the family secrets." He let out a harsh laugh. "Matthew and the others are still sniffing around that cabin like hounds who've lost the scent. But I'm smarter than them." "What do you want?" James asked, his hands slowly moving towards his own rifle. "The same thing you want," the trapper said. "The fortune. I've been a loyal dog for the Crow family my whole life, and what have I got to show for it? Scraps. I want my share. A big share." He grinned, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. "Help me, and I'll help you. We can get the treasure, split it, and disappear. I can lead you out of these mountains where they'll never find you." It was a tempting offer, a guide, an ally. But James looked into the man's eyes and saw nothing but pure, undiluted greed. This man wasn't an ally. He was a snake waiting for the right moment to strike. "We're not interested," James said, his voice flat. The trapper's grin vanished. "Wrong answer." He shifted his aim from James to Nora. "Give me the children." The moment he said it, James moved. He lunged forward, not at the trapper, but at Nora, pushing her and the babies behind a large boulder. The trapper's rifle roared, the bullet sparking off the rock where Nora had just been standing. The canyon erupted in a flurry of motion. James drew his pistol and returned fire, using the rocks for cover. The trapper was a good shot, pinning him down. But as the two men exchanged fire, Nora was no longer thinking like a victim. The woman who had been tied to a post was gone, replaced by a mother fighting for her children's lives. She knew these canyons. She had been forced to live near here, in Caleb's oppressive shadow, for 2 miserable years. She knew the loose shale, the treacherous paths, the way the wind echoed off the rocks. While James kept the trapper busy, she scrambled up the side of the canyon, the baby secured tightly to her chest. She moved with a desperate agility she never knew she possessed. Above the canyon floor, the rocks were unstable, a precarious wall of loose scree. She could hear shouts from the direction of the tunnel exit. Matthew and the others had found their way through. They would be in the canyon in minutes. Nora found what she was looking for, a large, precariously balanced rock formation holding back a cascade of smaller stones and gravel. It was a natural deadfall trap. She peered over the edge. James and the trapper were still locked in their deadly dance. Below the tunnel exit, Matthew and two other crow men were just emerging, blinking in the sunlight. They were all clustered together, right in the kill zone. With a primal scream of rage and grief, Nora put all her strength into shoving a large rock at the base of the formation. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then with a deep groan, the entire rock wall gave way. A river of stone and dust thundered down into the canyon. The trapper looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief, a split second before the rock slide engulfed him. Matthew and his men had no time to even cry out. The avalanche of rock and earth swept over them, a final, decisive act of justice from the very land they sought to control. Silence descended on the canyon, broken only by the settling of dust and the soft crying of one of the babies. James stared up at the top of the canyon wall, his face a mask of awe. Nora stood there, silhouetted against the sky, no longer a damsel in distress, but a force of nature. She hadn't just saved them. She had exacted her own brutal, beautiful revenge. But as the dust settled, they saw they weren't alone. A figure stood at the far end of the canyon, clapping slowly, mockingly. An old man leaning heavily on a gnarled cane, flanked by two more armed guards. He was impeccably dressed, despite the rugged terrain, a stark contrast to the violence around them. It was Old Man Crow, the patriarch himself, the spider at the center of the web. "Brava, my dear," the old man called out, his voice thin but carrying an unnerving authority. "Truly spectacular. You have your mother's fire, I see." Nora stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" Old Man Crow smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. "Did Caleb never tell you? So foolish. Your husband didn't die in a riding accident, my dear. I had him killed. He was weak, sentimental, a disgrace to the Crow name." The words hit Nora with the force of another rock slide. "He was going to squander our legacy on you and these brats," the old man continued, his eyes glittering with a cold fire. He took a step forward, his guards raising their rifles. "But I suppose I should thank you. You've cleared out the dead wood for me. Matthew was a fool and the trapper a traitor." He pointed his cane at the babies. "Now, give me my heir." "Heir?" Nora stammered. "They're girls." The old man let out a dry, rattling laugh. "Oh, my dear, sweet, naive girl. The lies he told you. That's the most delicious part of this whole affair." He pointed to the baby with the crescent mark. "That one is Caleb's, true enough. But the other one?" His smile widened into a grotesque parody of grandfatherly affection. "Her father was the last of our rivals, the Logans. Caleb killed him, and as a final insult, stole his infant daughter to raise as a crow. The ultimate victory." Nora looked down at the child in her arms. A Logan, the daughter of a man her husband had murdered. She had been protecting the child of her family's sworn enemy. "Now," Old Man Crow commanded, his voice dropping the polite pretense, "hand over the children and the ghost. I will have my fortune, and I will have my revenge." He was the final monster, the mastermind who had orchestrated everything, the frame-up, the murders, the hunt. And in his eyes, Nora saw the absolute terrifying certainty of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. The fight wasn't over. The final, most dangerous battle had just begun. The canyon had become a tomb, and now it was to be an arena. Old Man Crow stood there, a frail-looking puppet master who held all the strings, his two guards like stone gargoyles on either side of him. James knew a direct assault was suicide. He was a good shot, but they were exposed. The old man had the advantage. He needed a diversion, a different angle. "Nora," he whispered, not taking his eyes off the trio, "when I move, you run. Head west, down the canyon. Don't stop. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce, her knuckles white where she clutched the infants. "You have to," he insisted. "This was never about the money for me. It was about this, about stopping him. Get the girls to safety. That's the only victory that matters." He looked at her then, a decade of loneliness and regret in his eyes. "Give them a life I never had." Before she could argue, he acted. He let out a loud war cry and fired a shot not at the men, but at a rock face high above them. The ricochet screamed through the canyon, drawing their fire. In that split second of confusion, James broke from cover, running in the opposite direction from Nora, drawing the guard's attention. "The ghost is mine!" Crow shrieked. "Get him!" As the guards chased James deeper into the labyrinth of rocks, Nora did as she was told. She ran. She ran with the strength of a mother who had seen the very bottom of the world and had clawed her way back out. She ran for the Logan girl and the Crow girl, for two innocent lives caught in a war they didn't understand. The chase was a blur of instinct and adrenaline for James. He was faster, more agile than the guards, using the terrain he knew so well to his advantage. He led them on a wild goose chase, doubling back, separating them. He took the first one out from behind, a swift, silent blow that left the man unconscious. The second was trickier. They exchanged fire, the shots echoing through the stone corridors. James took a bullet, a searing pain in his shoulder, but he managed to disarm his opponent, ending the fight with a brutal efficiency born of desperation. Wounded and bleeding, he staggered back towards the mouth of the canyon. He found Old Man Crow alone, waiting, leaning on his cane, a small silver-plated derringer now in his hand. "You are a cockroach, Callahan," Crow spat, "always surviving." "It's over, Crow," James gasped, clutching his shoulder. "Your men are gone. Your family is gone. Let Nora and the children go." The old man laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Never. That fortune is the blood of my family. It is my right. And that Logan girl, she will be my masterpiece. I will raise her as a crow, twist her, make her hate the very name she was born with. It will be my final, lasting victory over my enemies." The sheer, unadulterated evil in his voice chilled James to the bone. This wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about a sickness of the soul. From behind Crow, a shadow detached itself from the rocks. Nora. She hadn't run. She had hidden the babies in a safe crevice and circled back, the heavy rifle from the cabin in her hands. Crow heard the scrape of her boot on the gravel and spun around. He raised the derringer, his eyes wide with fury. But he was too slow. Nora didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She fired. The rifle's report was the last sound Old Man Crow ever heard. Silence returned to the canyon. A profound, ringing silence. It was over. Truly over. Nora rushed to James's side, tearing a strip from her dress to bandage his wound. They clung to each other for a long moment. Two broken people who had found a strange, violent path to salvation. Later, as the sun began to set, they sat by a small fire, the baby sleeping peacefully nearby. The key to the fortune was there, etched onto the skin of a child. They could go to St. Louis. They could be wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. "What do we do?" Nora asked, her voice soft. James looked at the fire, then at the two infants. He thought of the blood that had been spilled, the lives ruined, all for a pile of gold locked in a vault. "That money is cursed," he said. "It's built on pain and death. We don't need it." He looked at her, his expression serious. "We can give the law an anonymous tip. Tell them where to find the Crow fortune. Tell them it's blood money, evidence of a dozen crimes. Let them use it to build something good, to wash away the stain." Nora nodded, a slow, sad smile touching her lips. "And us? We disappear," he said. "We find a quiet place. We raise these girls, not as a Crow and a Logan, just as sisters. We give them a life with no maps, no secrets, just peace." She leaned her head on his good shoulder. The fire burned low, casting a warm glow on their small, unlikely family. The sky was a deep, star-littered purple. For the first time, the silence held no fear, only promise. They had walked through the darkest valley and come out the other side, not with a fortune in gold, but with something far more precious, a second chance, a home, each other. This wild, brutal story found its end not in a hail of bullets or a bank vault, but in the quiet resolve of two people choosing a simple life over a cursed legacy. They chose love over gold and peace over power. And that's where our story on this dusty trail comes to an end. But every story travels, and I'm always amazed how far they go. So do me a favor and drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing where in the world you're all watching from. What do you think they named the girls? Let me know your best suggestions. And if this story of survival, courage, and a man finally finding his redemption moved you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next journey into the forgotten corners of history. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.